Hey guys, I'm Georgia and welcome back for another episode of my midweek mystery series, where today I have possibly one of the craziest stories I've ever told. I first heard about this story a few months ago. I think it was on an episode of Case File, and I knew I had to share the story on my own channel. Today we're talking about a solved serial killer case, but not in the way that you'd expect. I also want to give Helen a quick shout out to say a huge thank you to her for helping me translate some articles for this video, as our story today actually took place in Germany mostly, and I don't speak German. So thank you so much, Helen. I couldn't have made this video without you. But before we really get into the story today, I want to share the sponsor of this week's video, Invisibleware, the jewellery that could save your life. I've worked with Invisawear on a couple of occasions before and they always get such a great response from you guys. I really truly believe in this company and what they're doing. Did you know that statistics show that nearly 1 in every 5 women get attacked at some point in their lifetime? I'm one of the lucky ones who hasn't yet fallen victim to that statistic, but I know it's always a danger that I and so many others need to be aware of. It's not unusual for that creepy guy to come and sit opposite you on the train and stare even though the rest of the carriage is available, or that guy on a night out who won't leave you alone, that feeling of being followed as you walk to your car at night. I don't think those are unusual circumstances for any woman and some men to find themselves in, that ever-present danger. Even with smartphones and the technology we have nowadays, in a stressful situation where you're actually being attacked or feel like you're about to be, you're probably not going to have time to be able to call for help, and that's a problem that Invisawear is on a mission to fix. Invisawear is a safety accessory. It comes in the form of bracelets, necklaces, keychains, fitness bands, even scrunchies, that when pressed can send an SOS alert to ADT with your exact GPS location. ADT can contact up to 5 loved ones of your choice and can optionally call emergency services for you if you enable that feature, although that is only available in the US at the moment. Invisibleware pairs with an app on your smartphone via low energy Bluetooth, on which you can add your personal profile, information about yourself that would be relevant to share with the police in case of an emergency. You simply rapidly double press this button on the back of the charm, which sends an immediate and silent alert that you need help. Invisibleware products aren't obviously safety accessories. A predator won't know that the necklace or whatever it is you're wearing is anything other than a pretty piece of jewellery. I have both a keyring and this gold necklace. It's absolutely beautiful and it's something I can easily wear if I know I'm potentially going to a situation where I could be at risk. There's no monthly fees or subscriptions to use the product, it's just the one-off price, although there is an optional premium subscription for which Invisibleware has collaborated with security company ADT if you do want an extra layer of safety. You don't need to remember to charge the charm. The battery is long lasting, it lasts 1 to 2 years depending on your usage, and the app will warn you when the battery is running low, as well as sending reminders often to check that everything is still in working order. And there's even an activity tracking feature in which before you start an activity like going for a run or travelling on your own, you can set a timer up to 4 hours and invite your emergency contacts and ADT or both to track you via GPS, even if they don't have the app. When you're done, just stop the timer, but if you don't and it can't be confirmed that you're safe, 911 will be notified. Invisibleware is one of those products that you hope you never have to use, but in the event that you do, it's there to keep you safe. Whenever I'm on my own now, I make sure I'm wearing the necklace, and it provides me with peace of mind that if something happens, my girlfriend, my mum will know where I am and get me help. I honestly can't recommend Invisawear enough. This weekend is Invisibleware's Black Friday sale, their biggest ever sale with 25% off, so now is the perfect time to pick up a charm for yourself or maybe for a loved one for Christmas. Believe me, it's worth it. On the 25th of April 2007, a 22-year-old police officer called Michelle Kaisvetter was on duty in the German city of Heilbronn. Her and her partner drove to the car park of a local fairground along the east bank of the Neckar River and parked there that day for a lunch break. At around 2 PM, it said that 2 people climbed into the back seat of their patrol car and shot the officers from behind, each shooting one with their own weapon. It happened so swiftly that neither of the officers had time to reach for their own weapons, handguns, which investigators later found were missing, as well as their handcuffs. Michelle managed to make it out of the car just about, but police units that arrived shortly after found her dead on the floor from a single gunshot wound to the head. Her partner Martin had also been shot in the head, and he did survive, but he was in a coma for several weeks, and when he came around he had no memory of the incident. Despite there being a fairground close by, cyclists and walkers, not a single person noticed anything unusual, or at least if they did, they never came forwards. As is always the case, the crime scene was scoured for any potential forensic evidence, and minute traces of DNA were found at the scene, on the car's centre console and on the back seat. And very soon the system flagged up matches for this DNA to other crime scenes across Germany from the previous 15 years. This definitely wasn't this person's first crime, and the only information investigators had was that the DNA was that of an unidentified female, and she'd been on a crime scene since the early 90s, with her DNA being found 40 times at crime scenes across Germany, France and Austria since 1992. We're talking multiple thefts and burglaries, as well as 2 attempted homicides and 3 actual homicides, including that of Michelle's. On the back of Michelle's case and the subsequent media coverage that came from it, this mysterious criminal would come to be known as the Phantom of Heilbronn, or the Woman Without a Face. Michelle's case was soon featured on a TV show in Germany, which I can only assume is something similar to Crime Watch here in the UK, and the investigators went on and answered a range of questions. They were desperate for any new information from the public, but they did hold back some things which they thought only the killer would know that they could use later in questioning. Journalists were even led to the crime scene and shown the police car in which the murder took place. The Phantom of Heilbronn was said to be a brutal and dangerous woman. She knew what she was doing, she is smart and able to evade capture at every turn. No one had ever seen her, not a single witness, in over 16 years. And the fact that this phantom was even a woman was crazy enough. Statistics differ a little bit everywhere you look, but it's all around the same numbers. In the past century, 11% of serial killers were female, with the number being closer to 5 to 7% in more recent decades, although of course that is just the killers we know about. Female serial killers are said to be more quiet killers, preferring less gruesome methods like poison, which is used in 50% of cases, and smothering rather than knives, guns, blunt force, which are males' weapons of choice. All of this to say, this so-called Phantom of Heilbronn, the Woman Without a Face, was a very unusual female serial killer, not only in the murder in Heilbronn, but also in her previous crimes. So I suppose it's probably time to talk about those. The Woman Without a Face first appeared in May 1993 at the scene of a murder in Ida Oberstein, Germany, about 2.5 hours away from Heilbronn. 62-year-old Lieselotte Schlengler was found dead in her home after a neighbour knocked on the door and got no answer, so they called the police. Lieselotte was found dead inside her home. She'd been strangled with wire taken off a bundle of flowers found on a nearby table. Despite interviewing dozens of witnesses at the time, no one had seen or knew anything, and the case sadly went cold. There were no footprints at the scene, no fingerprints, no evidence at all, apart from some female DNA found on the rim of a china teacup that had been swabbed. And this female DNA was surprising because of the brute force required for this murder. The wire embedded in Lieselotte's throat suggested the strength of a man, but the DNA was 100% that of a female. Whilst they were able to find out the biological sex of the suspect here, DNA testing in 1993 wasn't exactly great, and therefore it wasn't properly tested until 2001. And the result, when it was finally analysed properly in 2001, was shocking. It was found that it perfectly matched DNA found at dozens of other crime scenes over the previous few years. Nothing as serious as murder, but crimes nonetheless, mostly burglaries. And then that same year, the DNA turned up at the scene of another murder in Freiburg, Germany. 61-year-old antique dealer Joseph Wilsonbach was found strangled in his shop in what seemed to have been a robbery gone wrong. There was a small amount of cash missing, and the murder weapon seemed to be a length of garden twine. The phantom's DNA was found on Joseph's body, on antiques in the shop, and even on the clothes sign that the killer had turned on the shop door. So now they had 2 murders, not enough for the woman to be considered a serial killer, but a concerning pattern nonetheless. Both victims had been strangled indoors with no sign of a break-in. As State Prosecutor Jürgen Brauer said, this suggested that the killer built up a non-threatening rapport before being let in. She made friends with her victims. Still, the DNA matched no one in the German system, and through later testing in Austria, all that could be determined was that the genetic material came from a woman of Eastern European ancestry. Profilers determined that the woman must be between 20 and 50 years old, so a fairly wide age range, and she was said to have contacts with the drug scene and moved often within the southwestern part of Germany. That's all they had. And then later in 2001, in October, her DNA was found once again. This time when a 7-year-old boy stepped on a discarded syringe on a path near his home in Gerolstein. The boy took the syringe home with him, and his parents obviously freaked out, rushing him and the needle to the local hospital. They were worried he could have picked up a virus, HIV. Testing showed that the syringe had been used recently to shoot heroin, and traces of blood on the needle luckily showed no signs of HIV. But it did come back being a perfect DNA match to that of the Phantom. Finally, another answer as to who the Phantom might be, and this time, a motive. She was clearly committing robberies in an attempt to fund her drug addiction. A famous criminal profiler called Kurt Kletzer concluded that the woman came from a damaged home life, that her caretakers had likely been drug addicts themselves. But weirdly, this analysis of the Phantom still didn't quite match with her crimes. Although she left DNA everywhere, she was meticulous in every other sense. She never left any fingerprints or witnesses of any sort. This wasn't quite the crime of a high woman just desperate for money for her next fix, willing to do anything to get it. It seemed more planned, more calculated than that. The kind of serial killer you'll only see in TV shows, a true psychopath. Investigators also noted that at a lot of the crime scenes, hers wasn't the only DNA found, but the second DNA was different each time, suggesting that this woman worked with an accomplice, but never the same accomplice twice. And yet all of these accomplices had managed to remain silent, uncaught. That's a lot of people you're including in your web of lies, a lot of chances for people to blab, for rumours to spread, but it never happened in a single case. Over the coming few years, the DNA would continue to pop up at a number of very odd crime scenes. 2 weeks after the heroin needle incident, her DNA would be found on a half-eaten cookie in a trailer home that had been burgled in Germany. In December 2003, there was a car stolen in Heilbronn. When it was found abandoned later, the woman's DNA was found on the petrol cap. It was found on a toy gun used at a gemstone robbery in France, an optometrist shop robbery in Austria, and on a bullet found at the scene of a fight between 2 brothers. Not on the gun, on the bullet. One brother claimed that the gun had belonged to their dead dad, the other brother denied this, but the brothers did belong to a Roma and Sinti family, a nomadic traveller family. So of course the police jumped on this. There's a whole lot to be said for the German police's treatment of a minority ethnic family here. It wasn't great, but investigators basically assumed that because Roma and Sinti people travelled around a lot, that could explain how the Phantom's DNA was being found here, there and everywhere. They really zoned in on this family, thinking that this woman must be related to them, but of course they found nothing. In Augsburg, 2 men were accused of being bicycle thieves on a huge scale. We're talking hundreds of stolen bikes. The woman's DNA was found in the 2 men's car, but they remained tight-lipped. And that's just to name a few. As you can imagine, the German police were beginning to lose it just a little bit. Despite a load of different teams talking to each other multiple times a month, no one could figure out what was going on. The only thing they knew for sure is that it was always only a matter of time before her DNA showed up again and more people refused to talk and share what they know. Who was this psychopathic woman terrifying people into silence? On the 7th of July 2007, the woman broke into a primary school where investigators found her DNA in the school. This was part of a series of school break-ins which had been happening in the area, and the police found a group of 9 teenagers to be the offenders. Not a single one of them would explain how this mysterious woman's DNA ended up at the crime scene. It was always the same story. It became clear that people were terrified of this woman, and not just the people associated with her crimes. When the media really caught wind of this story after the murder of Michelle in 2007, even the regular person became terrified of the repercussions of this clearly very dangerous woman. Could this explain why not a single witness came forward saying they saw anything of Michelle's murder that day? As I said, hundreds of people were in the vicinity, but apparently not a single person saw anything. And this is despite them offering €300,000 for any information leading to her arrest. In the aftermath of Michelle's murder, the Heilbronn Police Department devoted more than 16,000 hours to finding this phantom woman. DNA testers took samples from nearly 3,000 homeless women, female drug users, and women who had a record of serious crime, but they never found a single match. Some investigators became convinced that the woman was part of an organised group of burglars from Eastern Europe, but as one pointed out, even in jail, these people don't talk. In Germany, there are pretty strict limits on DNA testing, to the point that they've even banned all direct-to-consumer genetic tests. The legislation strictly defines a situation in which the analysis of a person's genetic material is legal, and it pretty much only goes as far as allowing paternity tests, testing on IVF embryos for medical disorders that appear in early childhood only, and the use of genetic testing on adults to identify predispositions to medical disorders. That's pretty much it. I don't think you have to be a genius to figure out why this is such a strict law in Germany. Hitler's goal was to create his blonde-haired, blue-eyed master race, and Germany are not a country who are willing to repeat their past. Genetic testing is a slippery slope to that. However, Austria does not have such strict rules, and the phantom's DNA has been found there. It was through testing in Austria that we know this woman was likely of Eastern European descent, that she maybe had blonde hair and blue eyes, but I do think that last thing was just a rumour. I didn't see that confirmed anywhere. Police started to wonder eventually if this woman might actually be a transgender man, the DNA showing the biological sex rather than the gender, but of course again that was just speculation. At many of the crime scenes where DNA had been found, witnesses reported seeing men, never a woman. In 2006, there was a burglary attempt in Saarbrücken, and the DNA was found on a stone at the crime scene, but witnesses had seen a man. A composite picture of a man sporting a soul patch was released to the media, and investigators were very open to the idea that this really could be the person they were looking for, either a very masculine looking woman, a woman in a very good disguise, or a transgender man. In February 2008, another huge story hit the headlines when the bodies of 3 car dealers from Georgia were pulled out of the Rhine River near Mannheim. The men had travelled to Germany to buy used German cars that they could transport home to sell, but they met their deaths on the journey. According to the article The Phantom of Heilbronn by Paul Buchanan, evidence showed that the men had been executed near Ludwigshafen, and the bodies were transported from there to the river. 2 men were quickly arrested for the crimes, a 40-year-old Iraqi man and a 26-year-old Somali man. The Iraqi man had been working as a police informant, and his car showed blood traces from one of the victims. This car had actually been on loan to him from the local authorities, so I don't think he quite thought that one through. But as you can probably guess by this point, blood wasn't the only thing investigators found. Sure enough, they found traces of the woman without a face on the carpet as well. These men must have been the woman's accomplices, the men seen at the crime scenes, the other DNA found at the scenes. It all started to click together for investigators. Only as always, they both denied having any knowledge of this woman, and they both accused the other of being the one to actually kill the Georgian men. Despite this being what they thought would be a huge lead, it was another dead end for the authorities. But don't worry, she's going to slip up eventually, investigators told the public. And then in March 2009, the French authorities came across a burned corpse of what they thought to be a male asylum seeker who had gone missing in 2002. They didn't have his identity, but they did find out that he had had his fingerprints taken for his asylum application all those years earlier. They hoped that there would be some residual DNA on the fingerprints that they could use to identify this man, but what they found baffled them. They found the DNA of the woman without a face. This body, that was clearly that of a biological male, was actually female. It just didn't make sense. So they swabbed the fingerprints again, and this time they found none of the phantom's DNA. There was only one way this could be. The fingerprint had clearly been contaminated. So they started investigating, and they found there was no way that this fingerprint could have been contaminated or touched by the phantom between when it was done and when this was processed in the lab. So the only possible answer was that the testing material itself may have been contaminated. And that's not possible because the swab had come straight out of sterile packaging before being used. But this was the only explanation, so they looked into it further. Soon they discovered that the French lab and the lab in Heilbronn used to run the forensic evidence from Michelle's murder used the same brand of cotton swab, manufactured by the same German company at the Greener Bio-1 factory. A deeper look showed that every lab the phantom's DNA had made an appearance at had used this brand of swab. Other crime labs that used different brands of swabs had never found a single match to the phantom. Yeah, this was getting quite embarrassing very quickly. 16 years, 40 different crime scenes, so many tunnel vision investigations looking for a female, and it was becoming pretty clear that the woman to whom this DNA belonged to was likely not a killer at all. These swabs had been contaminated at the source. But how did this come to happen? How did one woman manage to contaminate so many swabs that were supposed to be sterile and were marketed as such? And they were indeed sterile. They had been processed to remove all germs, fungi and viruses. The exact sterilisation procedure they used at the manufacturer, though, just didn't remove DNA. Turns out these cotton swabs had never been certified for use in collecting or analysing DNA samples, something which the manufacturer was very quick to point out. The DNA of the Phantom of Heilbronn was very quickly traced back to an Eastern European woman, an employee at the factory, who had unknowingly and perhaps carelessly been handling and contaminating these cotton swabs in the packaging process. The DNA from her could have been anything from skin particles, sweat, saliva, whatever else. For nearly 2 decades, investigators have been bringing the woman's DNA with them to the crime scenes, and when the labs tested the swabs, that's what they'd been finding, not any DNA picked up as a result of a crime. I am quite thankful they figured out this was a case of contamination before they traced the DNA to this woman. I can't even begin to imagine how harsh a questioning would have been if it had been the other way round. As you can imagine, this whole situation was incredibly embarrassing for the German authorities. They'd spent millions of euros, thousands of hours of police time on a wild goose chase for a woman who wasn't a criminal at all while the actual criminals were getting away pretty easily because no one was looking for them. Perhaps you could excuse it the first couple of times the DNA was found, there's no reason to question that, but surely you'd start to think something contamination-y was going on when the DNA started to be found in some of the very odd places I've spoken about in this video. It seems that it was only from April 2008 that they started to realise that things weren't adding up. They couldn't even begin to construct a psychological profile of this perpetrator, but they still didn't think contamination. In the aftermath, the Federal Criminal Police Agency called for a review of police forensic techniques to rule out this ever happening again. It threw into question the entire DNA database of Germany, which had 620,000 samples in it. How many of those were contaminated? And fair play to them, because things really did change with a completely new ISO standard coming into play in 2016. This standard wouldn't just affect Germany, but so many countries around the world. Loads of people started to get concerned that the same thing could happen elsewhere in their country. ISO stands for the International Organisation for Standardisation. They're an independent, non-governmental, international organisation with a membership of 165 national standards bodies. That's most countries around the world. ISO 18385 is intended to minimise the risk of DNA contamination in products used to collect, store and analyse biological materials for forensic purposes. It's the world's first international standard on the manufacture of forensic consumables, intended to give end users confidence that manufacturers are meeting the correct standards and requirements to ensure that the products they use are fit for purpose. I know that the swabs used by the labs in this case weren't actually supposed to be used for DNA collection. I'm not sure where in the chain something went wrong. Maybe it was the wrong person ordering things in at the lab. Maybe it was the manufacturer sending the wrong thing. I couldn't find an answer to that. That's a problem with doing sort of foreign cases. There's probably a lot of information that I missed because I don't speak German. It is still a concern that something like this could have happened in the manufacture of swabs that were intended for DNA collection. So they needed to do something to give people faith. The world is becoming more and more dependent on DNA evidence by the day. And this is all something to think about, isn't it? So often we say, and I'm very much guilty of this as well, that DNA evidence can't be disputed. But I think this case is a great reminder that it very much can be. DNA shouldn't be relied on 100%. You shouldn't half-ass arrest investigation just because you've got what you consider to be some strong DNA evidence. The puzzle needs to be complete before anyone is convicted of anything. DNA is an enormously powerful tool, but this isn't the first time that someone was, or could have been, I suppose, falsely accused of a crime. In a different timeline, this woman could have ended up in prison. At one point, Germany was transfixed by the story. Everyone knew about the story of the Phantom. Everyone had their own theories. But no one's theory was contaminated swabs. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and please don't forget to check out Invisawear. It's a company I believe in so strongly, and I really do think it could make all the difference. Please stay safe, make sure you check them out in the top line description, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.